Good morning, I'm Kelly with Bray, and this morning we're going to talk a little bit about body condition scoring with donkeys. It's a fairly common thing that people will get donkeys and they're unsure of what their body type is supposed to be and what their ideal weight is supposed to be because it is a lot different than a horse. So we're just going to go through a couple of different ways you can look at your animal and identify if they are the correct weight, if they're overweight, if they maybe need some additional nutrition or need their diet changed in any way just so they can remain as healthy as possible. So I have here with me today, we have Coco and we have Hamilton, and they're obviously miniatures. And miniatures are going to have a slightly different body shape than your standards and then your mammoths. Coco is a little bit more shaped like a standard. She has more standard proportions. And Hamilton over here is more your typical miniature. And so you'll notice they do look a little bit different, but you will also notice with them, they do have the same body condition score, and it's pretty ideal. They're not in amazing shape right now, so they could have a little bit more muscle, but it is what it is. We just haven't been getting out as much as we should. But you'll notice with them as well, even though they have the same body condition score, Coco is a much finer, more refined animal than Hamilton. They're pretty nearly exactly the same height, and Coco, with the same body condition score, does weigh about 20 pounds less than Hamilton. And the reason for that is that she is a much more refined animal, as I said. So if you come and look at her, she's a lot shorter in her body. So he's got a lot more length here that is going to add some weight. Also, when you look at her, you are going to notice that her legs are much more refined. They're much thinner than his. Her bone structure is just a lot more refined than he has. And so if you come over here and look at his legs, you'll note they're quite a bit sturdier. His head's a lot heftier. And so, again, even though their body condition score is the same, their weight is fairly significantly different. She weighs about 200 pounds. He weighs about 220 pounds. There are a couple of ways to score the body condition of a donkey, and typically body condition score is abbreviated as BCS. So, but right now we're just going to call it body condition score. There are two scales. One is 1 through 5 and one is 1 through 9. The 1 through 9 is called the Equine Body Condition Score. And it is the one I prefer simply because there's a little bit more nuance to it. Obviously, there's more numbers, so there's more nuance. So what we're shooting for is obviously dead in the middle, 4.5. It starts from emaciated and near death and goes to morbidly obese. We want to be right in the middle. And so when I talk about this, I'm going to generally score it on that 1 to 9 scale as opposed to the 1 to 5 scale. Obviously, with the 1 to 5, you're going to want to be a 2.5, but with the 1 to 9, 4.5. So it's very important when you're discussing body condition scores to ascertain which scale the person is talking about, because they can be vastly different with their numbers. So once more, these two donkeys have a pretty good body condition score, although they are differently shaped. But what you're looking at with a donkey rather than a horse is, one, they're never going to have the amount of muscle a horse has. Donkeys simply do not. As desert animals, they're thriftier. They don't have this big round butt. They're never going to. They don't have this big heavy shoulder and chest, especially if in the West you're used to seeing quarter horses and quarter horse crosses that are these big bulldoggy animals. Donkeys are never going to look like that. They're going to be fairly angular, and you're going to see some angle in their hip. You're going to see more angle in their shoulder. They're going to have a much less muscular neck, all at an ideal body condition. So again, we do not want to do this as if they're a horse. If you're trying to get a quarter horse butt on your donkey, you're going to have a very obese donkey, and that's going to be all fat pads, and everyone's going to be very sad about it. So what we want to look at with a donkey is they're going to have visible hip bones generally. And again, these guys could use a little bit more muscle here, but they're pretty good. And you can still see these hip bones. You can still feel these hip bones. But while you can still see and feel them, they're not protruding. You don't put your hand on them and go, oh, yikes, that feels terrible. They're there, but they're not incredibly visible. Another thing we're going to look for or look at, Hamilton, if you could turn, buddy, is the shoulder. Again, they've got this angular shoulder that's different than a horse. It's unfortunate we couldn't do this during the summer when they're a little bit more slick, but I don't want to be out here in the summer. But they've got this angular shoulder that, once again, it has some cover to it. If I put my hand here, it's not just full of bone, but I can feel that point of shoulder here. And then we have their top line. And their top line is where a lot of animals will initially lay down fat pads. Their top line and their crest, and we'll talk about their crest in a minute. But their top line and their rib, we'll talk about their also feeling their ribs in a minute, but you can feel their ribs, and there's, again, you can feel their withers, you can feel their spine, but it's not protruding. We don't have big concavities here. It's also not flat with a concavity that is their spine. So we don't want concavities where these muscles are, or concavities where their spine is. One is too thin, one is too fat. And then finally, we have their neck. Hamilton is one who will always put fat in his crest first. And some donkeys are like that they always will go to fat in their crest, which is why every day when I come out and pet him, I feel his crest and make sure it's nice and soft. Because if it starts to get firm, that means he's got a blood sugar issue and we need to worry about his feed. It's going to be a little firm tomorrow after he's been snacking on this grass. And so we might have to go for a long walk today. But he's got a little bit of a crest, but it's soft. And so we don't worry about that too much, because with his body type, that's just simply where he puts his fat immediately. If I try to get rid of that crest entirely, he will be emaciated on the rest of his body. Coco is different. Hamilton has that little bit of a crest, Coco does not. So if Coco's getting a crest, we have a big problem. And again, their neck is slender, but you don't want to be able to put your fingers together and touch them in their neck. But they're not going to be big and hefty like a horse. One other thing to consider with minis is they do tend to get a little bit of a gas belly, and they do tend to be just a little bit more round in the belly anyway. You can help that by doing core exercises, doing step overs and hills and things like that. And that will also help them not get a sway back. But they also do tend to just be a little bit gassy. And so the best time to ascertain their body condition score is right first thing in the morning before they eat, before they've had a chance to tank up and get a little bit gassy, or if you've taken them for a walk and they've rolled and they've gotten all that gas expelled. But we do want to make sure that we're not too worried about the roundness of this belly if it fluctuates throughout the day. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble, especially on young donkeys as well. They will, like small children, have a little bit of a belly even if they're in good shape, simply because their muscles are not strong and not developed yet. So be a little bit careful. A belly can also be an indicator of worms or malnutrition. So if you're worried about their belly, talk to their vet, but just keep in mind that could be an indicator of a problem. It could be nothing, just how minis are. But we've seen several minis get in kind of a bad situation because their owner is trying to get rid of that belly via restricting calories, and that belly is nothing more than gas or a lack of nutrients. And so restricting that feed is actually causing a bigger problem than it's solving. Here we have Coco, and like I said, she has a different body shape than Hamilton, but we're going to go through the same types of things to ensure that we are scoring her correctly. And if you come over here with me, you can see from the top here, she's got these hips that poke out just a little, and that's the same with Hamilton. And this is good. This is what we want. She's got not protruding spine. She's got to go wandering. But she does have a little bit of visible hips, nice and smooth here. We don't have fat pads. And let's see if we can get her to lift her head out of this grass. She doesn't have this neck crest like Hamilton does. So again, if she starts feeling cresty, I know that with her body shape, that neck crest is a big problem and we have to reassess our feeding. But once more, she's got a little bit of a point here on her shoulder. She's very narrow in the chest, and that's just her build. Hi, Coco. And then we've got a little bit of angular hips down to an angular back end. And she's got a little less belly than Hamilton does. Again, he's pretty long in the back, and that will lead to a little bit of drooping in the belly if you're not doing enough of those workouts. But yeah, so no fat pads. She's got a good feel to her ribs. She's got a feelable shoulder, and it's a little bit visible, but it's not very aggressively sticking out, and a little bit of visible hips here. Our final thing that we're going to do is a little bit of a practical hands-on way of telling, hey, is my donkey a little bit too fat or a little bit too thin? And in the winter especially, it's very important that you actually get hands on your animals and feel them, because their winter coat can hide a lot. So once again, we want to feel over this hip and make sure you can feel it, but you're not falling into a big pelvic rut right here. And obviously, if they're too overweight, you can't feel it. There's going to be fat pads here. But one of the easiest ways to decide if your animal is at an appropriate weight is to get your hands on their rib. And that's going to be just about right here. You're going to feel for their ribs. And what you're looking for, this is our little secret of how to do it. You're going to make a loose fist with your hand. And in my case, it would be if you were taking a tiny lizard out of your house and going to release it outside, that's your loose fist. So then what you want to feel here, you're going to go, if it feels like this portion of your hand where your fingers are getting stuck down between those ribs and those ribs are really prominent, your animal is too thin. So we don't want these big divots that your fingers are getting stuck in, because that's too thin. So if you feel like this and you feel for their ribs and your fingers are falling down in them, your animal's too thin. If you feel over their ribs here and it feels like the back of your hand with a loose fist, where you can definitely feel, bye Coco, you can definitely feel those bones, but there's a little bit of cover and your fingers aren't falling down between them, there's flesh between them, that's just about where you want to be. And again, donkeys will put fat pads on the very top of their back. So if they have a visible fat pad and then, oh, I can feel their ribs underneath, they're still too fat if they've got those big fat pads, or if there's a divot where their spine is. But largely, if they're like Coco and they don't have a lot of fat pads, if you can feel it like the back of your hand, that's what you want them to feel like. If you go down along their ribs and it feels like this part of your arm, where it's fleshy, and you can sometimes get down and feel a bone in there, but there's a lot of cover there that's pretty fleshy and you have to hunt for those ribs a little bit, that's overweight. Your donkey is overweight or obese, and you're going to want to talk to your vet about making a diet plan for your donkey. So again, if their ribs feel like this, they're too thin. If they feel like this, your donkey's just about right. And if they feel like this, your donkey's probably overweight and you need to talk to your vet about taking some weight off that animal. We will go ahead and put the body scoring charts at the end of this video so you can check them out, but they're also very easy to Google. You just Google donkey body weight chart. The donkey welfare, or the donkey sanctuary, has some great charts for you. A Heineke scale is also what you can look for. But we want to thank Hamilton and Coco for being good little models here. Like I said, they're over here munching on this grass for now about 10 minutes. And so we're going to take them back off the grass and go give them all of their straw for the rest of the day and maybe go for a walk to burn off some of that sugar that they've eaten. But yeah, if you're wondering if your donkey is too fat or too thin, those are some easy ways to figure it out. And if you're still struggling to figure it out, go ahead and ask your vet.